I am here to sell you the wind. And as you can see by Madame Feng Popo on her tiger, wind is carried in a bag. I tried to call this thing a lot of different things, but in the end, it was a bag of wind. And since I'm a bag of wind, it worked out just perfectly. And one of the biggest questions people used to ask me was, how did you become a Hay House author? It wasn't like, oh, great, you're a Hay House author. It's like, why'd they pick you? And the truth is they picked me because they picked the book. The book, Winds of Spirit, brings back ancient knowledge that hasn't been on this planet for over 2,000 years. And trust me, when I started, I've been the Practical Shaman for ages, but when I started, I was writing a different book. And I want to tell you about how I got from there to here. So for some of you who don't know what shamanism is, shamanism is an ancient spiritual practice. And back before religion, people were classified by the languages that they spoke. If you were in a common group and spoke a common language, that's how you identified. And people were wind believers. And then what happened was religion came in and divided people into Christianity, Muslim, Buddhism, and all of that. But it was wind. Holy Spirit's a wind, Ruach is a wind, Pneuma is a wind, Nirvana is a no wind. It was wind. And I don't know how this information has been kept from us from all these years, but as a shaman and the practical shaman, which is redundant because all shamanism is practical, where shamans are concerned about the community, the health of the individual, and that the survival of the clan. And that this information was kept from us as we went forward and got divided into religions. But right now there is a God-shaped hole plaguing our society. I work in addiction treatment and I see it every single day. And what I was told in the middle of the night is that this starts with family. And at 30, when Louise Hay started Hay House, I started my spiritual quest. And I believed that books are destined to get to Hay House, and I was destined to have my book at Hay House when I started to study Louise Hay at 30, because I had mental health and addiction disorders. I was self-medicating with marijuana. I was depressed. I spent days on end in bed. And I was abusive, but I was super creative and talented. I could have been a world-class chef, but my disorders got in the way. Now I know, looking back, that you know what, I still cook for fun, and I had a farm-to-table restaurant 25 years before it was the cool thing to do, and my job was to help other people heal. How my spiritual adventure started was a relationship with my father, and that's why we're going back to family today. My father was bigger than life. We had hardly any relationship. When my parents divorced at 7, I remember jumping up down on the bed, excited that he was leaving our house. And this is really not how a 7-year-old should feel, but this picture is the grand opening of my restaurant, which I was 30 years old. All my family came together so that I could open this grand opening of this celebration. For 2 or 3 months before this, my father called me every single day, and we had the relationship for the first time in our lives. As all good things are with my father, the next day he went home and had a massive stroke. And right away, all my banking relationships were cut off. My stepmother told me I better pay the bills or she'd tell them to take my building back. And 2 weeks later, my stepfather dropped dead of a heart attack while out jogging. So at 30, here I was faced with all of these mental and addiction disorders and no support. So what did I do? I did cocaine for a year before I realized that, hey, this is the legacy that I've got from this man who was then for 3 years before he died of cancer. And I was really abusive to him. And I've since made an amends at his grave, and we're good. But he never got to see the person that I grew to become over the next 30 years. After I took away the liquor and the cocaine, and they didn't go all right away, they took their time. The liquor went first, the cocaine went a year later, and then 7 years later I quit smoking pot. I ended up in a lockdown ward. And luckily for me, that I was curious and spiritually drawn, that the psychiatrist used to take me outside the ward, around the neighborhood for walks, because after all, I was grooming to be a shaman, and we'd walk in the neighborhood, and he would tell me about how the brain works. They gave me some lithium, some Zoloft, and within a week, 2 weeks, I was back in my restaurant, and I said, if this is what normal people feel like, I don't want it. And so I found this Ayurvedic doctor 2 hours away. I drive to see him once a month, and he explained to me that if I worked with him, that he would start to balance out my organs and these other addictions would fall away. And that's precisely what happened. Where did my spiritual path begin? I don't know, probably in the last lifetime that I hadn't unfinished business, because I've been really busy this lifetime. But then soon after I got out of the lockdown ward, at those times they didn't have dual diagnosis treatment centers, which we have now, I met a nun she was doing fire walks. So up in Norwalk, New York, 30 years ago, I did my first fire walk. And it was really a mind-expanding thing for me to learn that consciousness had its limits, that we could do way more than we were taught to do. And from there, I started on a journey. I started on a journey to fill that God-shaped hole inside of me that was plaguing me, and it took me 30 years. I went to see the Pacos in Peru. I went horseback riding in Chile. I even jumped out of a plane looking for God. I don't know about you, but I've done a lot to find my power, to find that faith that lived inside of me. Then I got to realizing that cooking saved my life. The fact that I had to show up every single day and chop onions and people were going to show up there saved my life. It was like the first thing that I understood, that becoming one with the food did something more, that I got outside of myself. It probably was a very shamanic experience. So I sat down to write this book about the shaman chef, how cooking saved my life, which was entered into the Next Top Spiritual Author Contest, which kind of inadvertently got me standing here today. When I wrote this book, the first time through, it was a garbage dump. The second time through, I made everyone else all right and me wrong. And the third time through, it became more universal. But, I'm going to go back there. My mother. I thought the poor relationship was with my father, but my mother finally got mad enough and didn't speak to me for a year. How dare you put this family business out on the clothesline for everyone to see? My distant relatives who never spoke to me got online on Facebook to berate me and tell me how dare I talk about my father in such a way. And we don't need to go into all my father's behavior or my relationship with him, but it damaged my life. But what I didn't realize is that there was a more important relationship that I was overlooking, was the one with my mother. And she was still alive, and he had been dead now for some 20 years by the time I got to really putting this book out to the world. So I made a commitment to her that I wouldn't publish this book until she passed. So I decided, this is in my best thinking, that I was going to write a book my mother would read. And I'm a soul coach, and I have lots of clients, lots of experience. And so I decided to write a book called Is Your Compass Pointing True North? Now, that's a book that Hay House would have never published. But I didn't even know what a compass was. This is how I jump out the plane. I didn't know what a compass was, so I started doing research. All of a sudden, I was back to 3050 BC, the feng shui compass in China. Then in a meditation one night at a fire circle, I was shown that our bodies are actually the compass, that we model everything in nature, and nature models everything back to us. So long story short, I kept following this compass thread, and I saw, this is interesting, all of the compass points are wind points. And as I searched further and further, I've actually found 150 cross-cultural winds that all had, you think wind is wind, right? Who thinks wind is wind? No one here in this group? Okay. In any case, you might think wind is wind, but to go to the Polish wind is about compassion. Oya, the Yoruba wind, is about transformation. The divine mother wind, Mari, the Basque wind, is about holding us in peace and forgiveness. So winds had different consciousnesses throughout the globe. And now what I've come to realize is that they've informed consciousness from the very get-go. You could spend a lot of time going into this, and my book, The Winds of Spirit, goes into it in great depth. But where I found this was one day I was walking along Eby's Landing, and all of a sudden the wind started to talk to me. Trust me, I'm the practical shaman. I used to make fun of people who channeled, and all of a sudden, here I am with my high-end client from New York who was a banker, started to blow the wind whistle, which you heard, and the wind started to speak to both of us. I followed that track, I did the book, but the most important thing was my mother. And it really makes me really happy to tell you, that's my mother holding my book up in Portland, Maine at her bookstore. Because what I thought was my perception of our relationship, as I healed, she healed. When I no longer had to make the book about what my mother did or didn't do, but that I wrote a book that she could really experience, she's so proud of me that in a couple of weeks I'm going up to Maine to talk at her library at an event she organized. And when she saw my book, she sent me this card that said, "I've always been proud of you." And so as I track back, my perception that got so broken all those years ago was just not the truth. And as I've invited the winds into my life, I've never felt more held. I've never felt more connected. I've never looked around again to find out what my spiritual experience is, because I've been shown over the last 5 years as I brought this work forward that each and every time that the winds have my back. And so what I'm going to do here to close up is I'm going to invite you to see if you want to invite the winds into your life, and I'm going to blow the wind whistle one more time for you and ask you to see if that feels right, and you can bring the winds into your heart. And if you think this is crazy, because trust me, I did at some points, I can guarantee you one thing. After this talk, after you listen to this talk, when you go outside and you feel the wind, because remember, it's a power greater than yourself that you can't see, that influences your life, your relationship with the wind will forever be changed. So I invite you to close your eyes. And since Madame Feng Popo was here with her tiger, anything that you have unresolved in your life or that you haven't dealt with, I invite you to write it on the sky in your invisible pen, and Madame Feng Popo is going to come by with her wind bag and collect it for you and take it. And on this third one, let's see that wind bag being tossed out past the Milky Way with all of our heaviness, any suffering in our heart, any unresolved relationship, and thank her for coming along today to help us with this healing.